So today I'm going to be showing you guys how to produce in the style of House on Fire by Mimi Webb. It's this sort of 80s synthwave running beat, but there's a lot of really cool layers with guitars and synths. We're going to be talking about how to get a bass super wide without messing up your stereo field, how to get cracky 80s snare drums that actually punch through a mix, how to layer up multiple synths into a single synth sound, and so much more. But before we jump into it, let me introduce myself. Hi, my name is Seth. I work as a remote producer specializing in guitar-based pop. Songs I've either written or produced have been featured on these Spotify curated playlists, and I did an entire album through Warner Music Group. So if we seem like we'd be a good fit for each other, check out the top link in the comment. All right, now into the beat. So the first thing we're going to look at are these guitars, which sound like this, which then in the chorus goes to this, which is the same progression, just played a little bit more open. So for this acoustic, I just used my AKG P170. Like I said in my last video, it's kind of like my favorite pencil condenser for recording acoustics. As you can see, we double tracked these guys. And then for the mix, we are using the acoustic guitar preset on Classic Strips and Slate Virtual Mix Rack, really taming some of the low end stuff. Also slamming it a bit more into the distressor because I wanted to slam these acoustics a bit more than I would on like an acoustic ballad or something like that. They're essentially textures in a EDM song. We then have some soothe, sort of taming these higher frequencies. I just really didn't want any of that nasty like 10K stuff happening. Did some EQ to carve some stuff out. And then at the very end, we used some tape saturation on 7.5 IPS speed. Without on. Next thing we're looking at are these pads here, which sound like this. They're just sort of lightly in the background. They're frozen right now because they use a lot of CPU power. These are the particle lines from Arcade by Output, and then I just kind of transposed them an octave up or down just to sort of bring that air into the beat, and then just blended them together into a group where, as you can see, I'm cutting out a majority of the frequencies, throwing on some auto pan so that it's going from left to right in the stereo field, and then really driving it to my reverb send, which is this ROM reverb from Native Instruments. That just fills out the upper mid-range. All right, next thing we're looking at is this synth part. Sounds like this. So for this, I just wrote this one MIDI part, then I duplicated it over a bunch of different synths, and then either changed the patch or changed the octave that it was playing in that patch. So the main one here is this guy, this like sort of saw lead. Which is Anna 2 on this gooey saws preset, and I know for a fact I messed around with like cutoffs and stuff like that, and I just wanted that sort of like cheesy 80s sound almost. But then underneath it, I have this synth playing the exact same thing. Which is also Anna 2, but it's this Heavenly Mallets preset. And then underneath that, I have that Heavy Mallets preset again, but it's playing an octave lower. So even though these two lower patches aren't like super audible in the mix, they really help to make sure that this one saw lead doesn't get swallowed up by everything else. So you can hear when I play them all together and then take these two out. And then I take them out. It just feels like there's no weight behind it now. I bring them back in. They just sort of add those harmonics that make it feel like there's a bit more weight behind it. So for the mixing of this lead, I really just used some MoTT from Slate Digital. If I turn it off, it's barely there. It sort of adds this sheen on top of it. And then just some basic EQ to filter out what I didn't need. I actually ended up automating this high end to come in a little bit more on the open parts of the beat. So here in the intro, you can actually see it move. I then actually take these exact same notes and I decided to play them on an electric, because if you listen to House on Fire, you can hear some slight plucky electrics in the background, a la The Police or some other new wave band. And in this song, they sound like this. In terms of guitar tone, we're not doing anything super crazy. We're just using this Andy in a Bottle preset, which is kind of like a Police style guitar tone, super chorusy. Very clicky and percussive. And so we're just double tracking these guys and then sending them into this bus and then adding a bit of reverb and delay to them. Once we go through those guys, now we have every producer's favorite mid-range tool, the Juno pads. So I've been messing around with Astra from Splice, which is actually a really fun tool for getting synth patches really quickly. It's essentially like Splice's drum sample library, but instead of installing drum samples, you get to install synth patches. And since it's a native synth that they have created when you install a patch, it just automatically comes into your folder right here, which is super awesome. But as you can see, we have 3 different Junos. The only difference is this one is like super filtered for the verses and the intro. And then these 2 are sort of more opened up that come in the chorus. So we have this Juno here, which as you can hear is a little bit brighter. And then we have this Juno down here, which is like an octave up, but the filter is closed a little bit more, and it just makes it this sort of like dense layer. And then for mixing, I'm just using some more Moti again. So on, off, on. It just makes it smile. The next element is this guy. This sort of lower pad octave, just doubling up the bass. Essentially, I just wanted another mid-range layer that could really tie everything together. So I used this Essential preset in Anna 2, ran it through some saturation knob from Softtube to make it super distorted, filtered out any of the frequencies that I didn't need, and then used a Juno-style chorus from Arturia to make it super wide. I was really conscious to filter out a lot of the bass from this sound so that we didn't get any weird like low-end stuff happening. And like these other synths up here, this one is actually set to open up EQ wise as the song progresses. So you can see that down here in the verse, it's down here around 300 hertz. And then for the drop, it opens up, which is just a fun little way to make your chorus a little bit more energetic. So we have all of these drums here. There's a lot of layers. So this drum group is called Other Drums because it's everything drum and percussion related except for the kick. For these EDM style drums, I really want to make sure that the kick can be on its own, and I'll show you how I do that later. But let me just go through everything super quick. We have these clap layers, just some more Moti and some EQ. We have this other clap layer from Decap, which is kind of falling into that hit. As you can see, like on the actual hit here, we're a little bit early and a little bit late, just kind of make it a little bit more looser. I don't even think I threw any processing on it. Down here, we have a sort of trap snare, which is a sample from Splice, which I then did a lot of transient shaping on, making the attack really harder, making the sustain a little bit shorter. I then have this rock snare, which is really important to the drum sound on this track. So I'm using the Taylor Larson drum sample, doing some very basic EQ, and then cutting out that like one resonant frequency that tends to happen in real snare drums. Some transient shaping again. I wanted to actually pull the attack out of this because we already had a decent amount of attack from all these other snare samples that were going on. So I just kind of wanted the body from it. So I actually cut out some of that attack, and then some Moti and some fresh air. You can actually hear how much processing I did to this. So with all of it off, with it on, this is probably one of my favorite snare samples that I use all the time. Then for the toms, I just got weird with this one. So what I did was I have the same MIDI playing on 2 different instruments. So we have One Kit Wonder by GGD, and then we have One Kit Wonder Fusion, also from GGD. And they're playing the exact same thing on different toms, but one of them is panned left and the other is panned right. And I actually summed them down to mono with a little bit of Moti beforehand. So they're super attacky, super brittle, but they're also very wide. I wanted to replicate the sound of like a drum line. I didn't really care about it sounding like a normal kit. And I think I kind of got the sound I was looking for at the end. Again, these guys were super mid-range heavy, so I just scooped a bunch of that out. Because I was really looking for that cheesy sort of scooped mids 80s tom sound. And then I use utility for a lot of like my gain automation. So the toms are kind of the break that goes into this next section, which is the chorus. And they were kind of quiet when I set them at the right level for the beat. So what I did was I just threw utility on this group and then gained it up like 8 dB just for this section. You can see where I did it right here. So just fun little automation stuff. I then have some hi-hats. Didn't do much here, just high passed it and cut out some of the annoying high end. So I have clap impact going on this song because of course, but then I also have another crash going. They just give a sort of like whoosh when the drop hits. And then one of my favorite elements of this is tambourine loop. It really ties everything together and makes it feel like a band on a stage in the 80s. Like, it's very jazzercisey. And then to tie all of these random samples together, I'm using the Comp FET 76 from Arturia on this wide drums preset. Really just pulling down those snares because that's the most oomphy thing happening right now. And then we have the kick drum, which looks like it's a decap sample, decap kick shaped. I don't remember what pack that's from, but you can look that up on Splice. Then going into some virtual mix rack, just sort of adding a lot of harmonic saturation to it and flatlining it. So without, with. Just kind of scooping those annoying lower mids and higher lows and then adding some saturation to it. And then we have our bass. Sounds like this. So this is an Anna 2 preset called Essentials. It's actually the same one that I was using for that sort of lower octave pad. It's just the MIDI is a lot lower. I high passed and low passed it because I really only wanted that like juicy, like low end. Threw it into this 808 Wakey preset, which is adding a lot of saturation and it's kind of clipping, but I kind of don't mind it. So if I turn it off, you can hear the sort of like saturation happening that just kind of makes it more present in the mix. I then threw a tube compressor on it just to sort of level it out a little bit more. We're sidechaining it to the kick, so you can see it's actually being pulled down whenever the kick hits. Because it's such a massive low-end bass, we're also using Soothe to dynamically pull the fundamental of the kick drum out of the bass every time the kick hits. And that just prevents any of the low end from crashing. And actually, this sidechain compression isn't just happening on this bass, it's also happening on the rest of the elements of the beat that are not the kick. So you can see if I actually collapse this instrument section, it's just instruments, the bass, and the kick. And there's this compressor on the instruments group. And I just did that because I wanted to be able to pull down the elements from the mix in a way that felt like the kick was the prominent instrument, because in House on Fire, the kick is kind of the main element and it's the main driving force of the beat. So I really wanted to make sure that that was the most present thing here. And then we'll just do a quick breakdown of my mastering chain. This is probably the best example of why you want to use subtractive EQ on the sides, because if we listen here, all of that is being cut out. That might be hard to hear, but it's essentially all the stuff below 180 that's on the side. So everything below 180 in this beat is being summed down to mono, which for a beat like this where there's a lot of like chorusy basses guarantees that we're not going to have any weird phase issues. Then we do a regular high pass, some more cutting on the sides, doing some parallel compression with Slate Virtual Bus Compressor, bringing up all of those lower elements without affecting this transients by using Waves MV2, doing some mid-range saturation only using Saturn 2 from FabFilter. So all of these other bands are actually not doing anything. So if I solo this guy, that's what's happening to the mid-range here. It sounds super disgusting and crushed. So you just pull the mix down until it's barely there. And it just works. Doing a tiny bit of high-end excitement with fresh air. Normally with this plugin on my mastering chain, I don't like to go above 3 on anything, just because it can be kind of a harsh plugin. Doing some additive EQ on the sides for some stereo spread, and then a maximizer on the end from Ozone. And I was constantly referencing this heavy bass preset in tonal balance control to make sure that we were hitting the ranges that we needed to hit. All right, now that I've explained everything, now here's the fun part. Let's listen to what the beat actually sounds like. And that's what the final beat sounds like. If you guys enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe and hit all those buttons below. You already know what to do. Again, I make one of these videos every Thursday, so if this is the kind of content that you enjoy, please hit subscribe. And if you know of any other pop songs that are guitar-based that you'd like me to recreate here, put them down in the comments. See you guys next week.